In every episode of Stories of Impact, we travel the world to explore intersections of science and spirituality. I'm your host, writer Tavia Gilbert, and along with journalist Richard Sergey, every first and third Tuesday, we look through a new lens at old traditions, hear from new generations as they dream up innovative solutions, and learn new ways to make sense of modern life. Meet Dr. Santiago Tobón. Born and raised in Medellin, Colombia, Dr. Tobón grew up in the 80s and 90s as gang violence surged in the country. As a kid, young Santiago was lucky to have enough privilege to keep himself safe and give him a promising future of education and employment. But there was no denying the impact that gang violence was having on kids his own age. When he graduated from college with a degree in computer science and got a job working in economic development, it was the first time he saw gang activity up close. For 4 years, he witnessed violent conflict around the local drug trade. He started to dream of finding a way to stop gang violence and stop kids from sacrificing their lives to gang culture. He wondered how kids could instead find a path to a flourishing future. What could he do to keep gangs from bringing in hundreds of new teenage recruits each year? He decided to arm himself with a PhD in economics.
Focused mostly on trying to understand and study crime, violence, and how to prevent that. And I think you start to study violence prevention and you get obsessed with that. So I've been doing that for the last, 10 years.
Colombia's long history of conflict around the drug trade means there's a lot of opportunity for study, says Dr. Tobón.
I think in Colombia, because of how affected by conflict is, this invites people to just study these things.
Colombia's drug trade began in the 60s and 70s with marijuana, before the international cocaine market started to take shape in the 70s and 80s. Coca crops and cocaine production remain big business in Colombia today.
Roughly 2/3 of the cocaine that's consumed in the world is produced in Colombia. And it's a super large market. The demand for the drugs is there. And if you have that, then there's going to be gangs. And so this creates incentives for organized crime to thrive. And then it evolves. So the challenge is how to mitigate the social costs that it creates.
What does mitigating the social cost look like?
I think it's about disciplining the behavior of the gangs so that it's a less costly thing. For instance, having the gangs there, but being these gangs less violent. Even if they are selling drugs, not to be selling fentanyl, but to be selling only marijuana and cocaine. Even if they have workers, not recruiting underage kids.
Dr. Tobón has become an expert in gang business after years of study and interviews with roughly 150 gang members from across various groups. Why were they willing to talk to him and his research team? Dr. Tobón says,
the typical approach with the criminal justice system is just to judge. And one reason we believe they talk to us is because we're not looking for the gossip of who killed who. We're mostly asking them about the broader things, how they work, how others work. And once you start to talk to them, you realize that it could have been you. And we also believe that they might be interested in talking to us because this gives them like a way to communicate what they think. The approach of the government has been only to just go and arrest them. So no one really has cared to understand them. They also many times have kids, and they understand that the cycles of violence are unsustainable in the long run. So that might give them also incentives to talk to us.
Currently, there are approximately 12,000 gang members in Medellin, with between 500 and 1,000 new recruits each year. Dr. Tobón believes that with the support of the Colombian government, it's possible that interventions could slowly reduce the number of new recruits by several thousand over the next few years.
And the way to do that is to approach this as if it were a labor market. You want to reduce labor demand. You want the firms to be less profitable.
Wait, it sounded like Dr. Tobón just referred to gangs as firms. Is that right? He says that's the right way to think about gang structure.
These groups are like firms. So in Medellin, organized crime is organized in 2 layers. The first one, at the street level, there are the combos, the street gangs, the small street gangs that sell the retail drug market and extort and so on. And above these combos, there are 19 mafia-like organizations. And today, these 19 organizations constitute a sort of board. So every combo is affiliated with one of these mafia-like organizations called razones. So that's kind of the market structure of organized crime as we see it today.
It's the combos that are always looking for new recruits. But how big are the combos?
We have 400 combos selling drugs. A combo is a group of 15 to 50 permanent members. Almost all of them are men. Their main revenue source is the retail drug market, mainly marijuana and cocaine. And the second revenue source is typically extortion, mostly on businesses, but some charge also households. And then there are different degrees of diversification. There are groups that have, for instance, loan sharking businesses, others in informal parts of the city that sell land plots. They regulate this market because the state is not regulating it. A microeconomist would say that's perfect competition. Prices should be low because these guys are going to be competing. But these razones collude so that no one can compete and everyone coordinates on prices, so in a form of cartel. So a combo cannot outcompete their neighbor by selling drugs cheaper. Prices are set, and these groups also regulate violence so that combos do not invade the territory of the other. There are sanctions for that because violence is bad for business. The combos have existed for decades, even from before Escobar.
Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar remains a significant figure in history in Colombia, even 30 years after his death. Escobar grew up in Medellin and formed the Medellin cartel in 1976, a drug trade that became a central economic force in the city. When the Colombian government moved to stop the cartel combo's booming business, Escobar declared war on the state and sparked extreme violence in the city.
Violence peaked in Medellin early 90s. In 1991, the homicide rate in Medellin was almost 400 per 100,000 residents, which is 4 times what we see now in the most violent cities in the world.
In 1991, 6,000 homicides in a city of about 2 million residents wasn't the only problem, says Tobón. There were left-wing guerrillas, militias trying to take over parts of the city, and there were right-wing paramilitaries also trying to take over parts of Medellin. In the midst of this social chaos, the gangs were trying to expand their businesses, but they were disorganized.
I think it evolved in a similar way as the mafia. Groups like these gangs in Medellin started to diversify. So now what we see is that a gang not only sells drugs, but also extorts, also engages in local monopolies over other products, like, for instance, gas canisters and many other legal businesses.
When Escobar was killed in 1993, another wave of violence washed across the city.
After the death of Escobar, there was a sort of war for succession within Medellin, involving also these left-wing militias and right-wing paramilitaries. And this fight was won by a well-known drug lord who goes by Don Berna.
Don Berna fought for control of Medellin's drug trade into the early 2000s, and after taking charge, organized all of the combos himself.
Once Don Berna wins these wars for succession, he imposes norms and violence went down. He imposed rules. He had paramilitary ties. So there was like discipline within these groups. Medellin became less violent, actually, because he imposed rules on how to use violence between gangs who could kill who, for instance. So the early 2000s were, by that time, the most peaceful times.
Don Berna's rule ended in 2009 when he was sentenced to decades in prison. And yet another bloody chapter began, the homicide rate nearly tripling. None of the 19 leaders of the Razones, mafia-style rivals, had enough power to take charge of the Medellin drug trade alone. So this time, they decided not to fight it out.
The most important business is the local retail drug market. That's the most important revenue source for all these groups. And no one is able to control the rest. This has created incentives for these groups to coordinate.
So the Razones began to work together to control the hundreds of street gangs to make sure that business remained profitable. And this coordination strategy worked. Even while the city's population has nearly doubled since its most violent days in the 90s, today about 4 million, Medellin, previously called the murder capital of the world, is now Colombia's safest major city. Even so, the drug trade is still growing, and the combos need to add new recruits every year.
It's less violent than before. It's partly because the state is more able, but it's mostly because these guys decided that violence was not a very good business for them, that it was very better to just have peace.
And peace has brought a degree of prosperity.
There's a lot of coca production. Today we have the highest extension of coca crops in history.
That prosperity creates a big problem for the government, despite the fact that the government is stronger than it was before.
Law enforcement in Colombia is stronger today than 20 years ago or 30. On the other hand, they face today a big trade-off because the city is peaceful, partly because these guys are organized. If you're the mayor, you want a peaceful city. But if you allow this to continue like that, then in the future, you might face a big challenge. And it's hard also because there's no easy solution. It's not like you're going to go and arrest these people. We estimate there's roughly 12,000 gang members. They don't fit into a prison. And there's already a retail drug market in the city. So even if you put them in prison, then someone else is going to come and supply the products.
So the combo's drug sales, extortion, money laundering, even commodities trading will continue. And anyone who wants to be a member can join. Dr. Tobón says that new members don't even have to be recruited.
We actually have an interview where a gang member tells us, we asked him, like, how do you recruit? And he said, we don't recruit. The kids come. One reason why they receive everyone is that often kids are not very good working in the gang, so there's some degree of rotation and turnover. But also, they don't want a challenging gang forming in their neighborhood. So they want everyone who is interested in this career to be with them. And he literally said, this is like a firm that hires everyone, no matter whether they know how to do something or not. So everyone is here.
This is partly why the gangs have needed to diversify.
Because if you're only selling drugs, there's only as many kids as you can have selling drugs. But if there's more people coming in, then you need to diversify so that these kids are doing something, right? So this is one reason we believe they started to participate in these loan sharking operations and selling land plots, and also enforcing monopolies on legal products within the neighborhoods, such as dairy products, gas canisters, and stuff like that.
So what's the process to become a member of a combo?
It's mostly local, mostly based on trust. The gang is always hanging out, and the kids from the same neighborhood just come and ask, is there something to do? I want to work with you. And this process evolves. So it's not discrete in the sense that there's like a baptism where you are now a member and you were not a member before. It's more that you're around. And after 3 years of maybe being around doing this and that, then you are more or less a formal gang member. So this is a progressive thing. There's no forced recruitment. It's not that the gang is forcing the kids to be there.
Another reason new members are so important, they finance a form of social security for the older members.
Now what we're seeing is that they are older than before. In the 19s and 2000s, they were younger because they were dying faster. But now that they're not dying faster, leaders are more senior. The leaders of the razones are typically in their 50s now. The base, they need to work, and part of the money goes up the hierarchy. So this has created a sort of pension liability.
Dr. Tobón knows a lot about the mostly male gang members, but he and his team plan to learn more about the women and girls that provide an infrastructure around the gang. New members are
mainly boys. Kids enter when they are between 15 and 17 typically, because that's typically a time when dropout happens from school, for instance, and they go up until 35, 40 typically. I think there's a masculinity component of this historically in Medellin, in terms of this idea of just trying to be the boss of the neighborhood, being kind of a male story mostly. Girls sometimes work, but especially when they are close to a gang member. And what happens with girls is that the sex work market is booming. It's becoming very complex. And there's a lot of interest because there's a lot of demand. And this is prostitution, but also pornography and so on. So one idea that we have is to think again through these lenses of occupational choice, to identify who are the little girls who are interested in sex work, and to think about interventions to also try to prevent that from happening. This is harder because we need to start over. Basically, we need to understand better how they think. We need to partner with other investigators who know more about how sex work works, but that's another avenue that this will probably follow.
Joining a gang offers some kids an opportunity to have power and authority, to command respect.
It's a gang, but it's also, they provide, to some degree, quote unquote, like governance services, right? So they provide security in the neighborhood. They provide dispute resolution between neighbors. So they become a sort of small local mayor who decides. And this is where a lot of disrespect comes from. It's because of this degree of organization. Combo coordinators end up being sort of respected by a large proportion of the population. They also try to foster this. so that the community protects them.
Dr. Tobón can understand the appeal of having so much influence. But there's a more practical reason Colombian kids join the combos.
There's a lot of rationale behind many of the decisions they make. We know, for instance, that an entry-level salary in a gang puts people roughly at the median of the income distribution of the city, so that they earn more than half of the workers in the city, even if they are a 15-year-old kid who didn't finish school.
He can see how easy it is for kids to be attracted to gang life.
At the same time, we wanted to prevent kids who want to join a gang from joining a gang. The first thing that we need to do to get that is to identify who are the kids who want to be in a gang.
His conversations with combo members helped Dr. Tobón make up a profile of what kind of kid would be most at risk of joining a gang. Then he set out to identify which actual kids were at risk of joining. He wanted to find a pool of kids that might be willing to work with his research team.
We were asking many questions to understand who are the kids who are interested in the gang. First, we start with risk factors, such as parental supervision, antisocial behaviors, impulsivity.
He and his team wanted to intervene in the lives of at-risk boys, ages 12 to 14, right before the age most kids, at 15, 16, 17 years old, join combos. First, he looked at 2 decades' worth of high school records against criminal records, then cross-referenced that with data about the gang's physical locations. That allowed the research team to focus on finding kids in public schools with the highest historic arrest rates, in neighborhoods with high levels of gang activity. And that helped him identify the top 100 public schools where the risk of gang recruitment was the highest, and find 15,000 kids who were at risk. They were able to get almost 2/3 of those kids' parents to agree to let their kids take a survey about what they imagined for their futures.
We've surveyed so far 9,000 kids. We're going to survey roughly 10,000. We think through this problem through the lenses of occupational choice, because there's risk factors, but at the end of the day, kids are deciding to join these gangs. And so what we do is we present the kids with 4 occupational opportunities. Occupations for which you don't require high school, such as bus driver, taxi driver, construction worker. Occupations for which you require some degree of community college, like for instance, a mechanic. Occupations for which you require an undergrad, like an engineer, a doctor, an accountant, and the illegal occupation. And we ask kids about their expectations on status, for instance, if you are in either of these groups and so on. And then we give the kids 10 tokens and we tell them, think that these are your 10 best friends. And tell me what do you think they're going to be doing when they are 25. And the kids distribute the tokens across the occupations. Then at the end of the survey, we ask the kids again, and we say that now don't think that these are your 10 best friends. Think that these are 10 clones of yourselves, 10 versions of yourself when you are 25. What do you think they're going to be doing? And the kids distribute the tokens.
The results show that at-risk kids believe that there is a 30% or higher chance that they'll be in a gang at the age of 25. And those are the kids Dr. Tobón and his colleagues wanted to help imagine a better future. The first thing they offer in response to the potential combo members' interest in the gang is an idea of what their educational and career options are.
Because through the surveys, we found that kids who are more interested in the gang believe that if you do go to community college or to an undergrad, you're going to earn less money than what you actually make in Medellin. So we're giving kids information with this. Also, we've identified in the survey that kids who are more interested in the gang believe that the gang brings more benefits, like respect, status, enjoyment, success with women, for instance.
The researchers want the boys to understand the reality of life in the combo. They tell the boys what combo members say happened to them when they joined.
Kids are joining gangs because they're making decisions, but most of these decisions are based on misperceptions. They're being deceived by gangs. Bringing information to the kid on the risks of death, the risks of arrests is one point. Also that even though they have like a system, they provide some welfare services. In the gang, you don't have like social benefits. They thought they were going to gain status, money, and many things. And once they joined the gang, there was only risk. Their families didn't accept them anymore. And then they were frustrated with the decision that they made to join the gang.
And the kids who get this information are shown to have less interest in joining a combo. But the allure of money and power is hard to compete with.
It's very challenging. I think at the end of the day, this is one of the reasons why these gangs exist and kids want to join a gang. And this is one reason why we probably won't stop recruitment from happening altogether, but we'll take at least some kids out.
So how can kids be guided away from gang life toward a better future, one by one by one? Dr. Tobón says the key is
get kids with better tools so that they make better independent decisions, that they're not deceived, that they learn which are the goods and the bads. They make decisions that are better informed, so that once they have more information, better tools for planning, for thinking about their future, they decide not to join the gang. We want to equip them with a skill to decide better on their futures. So that's one structural thing, because this behavioral change technique that we're trying to teach them is actually a skill that is useful not only to remain in school, but also to, for instance, drink less in the future, to make better decisions about your partner, stuff like that. So that it's a skill that gets them equipped with a better decision tool.
It's not just education about the costs of joining a gang that Dr. Tobón is offering kids. The next step is offering kids experiences, inspiring them, giving them space for new ideas and creative possibilities. This may be the most powerful intervention of all, and it's where he wants to focus next.
The second thing that we're doing is we designed a program that has two components. The families are also involved, so the families participate in some of the sessions. This is a 10 sessions program. One is vocational training, and the second one is a behavioral change technique to help kids plan, identify obstacles, and dream.
The kids are entitled to resources they've never been told about before, programs that might help them reach their dreams.
They often don't know that there's free public university. Maybe they know, but they don't know how to apply.
And the kids get to experience parts of the world they've never been exposed to before.
They go to a firm, they go to a university, to a country house, and they have activities there.
Offering kids opportunities like vocational training and having new experiences has already been proven to be an effective intervention in the US and Europe. Maybe Dr. Tobón's research reveals an essential truth about human beings. We have the potential to thrive when we have an opportunity to take care of ourselves, our families, and our communities, when we have an opportunity to learn new things, when people listen to our stories, when we have space and inspiration to enable us to dream of something new and different. So Dr. Tobón and his colleagues want to grow their program from its pilot with 50 teens up to 700 kids, but he needs Medellin's city government to invest.
The government is key when we think about scaling this up, because there's not a lot of philanthropy in Colombia. So if it's not the government, it's very hard to get someone to implement this at scale.
His long-term vision is that the program can be scaled in Medellin and across other Latin American cities where there are kids in gangs. How will Dr. Tobón measure the success of his program?
I would measure success if kids remain in school, perform better, make better decisions for their lives. We would measure success if kids don't get in contact with the criminal justice system as juveniles or older, if they continue and move to higher education, and if they get to work and they are not in the gang. It's thinking about how we get these kids to flourish.
And is he optimistic about his chances of success?
I'm optimistic, especially because we are much better now than what we were 30 years ago. We believe that the evidence is there, and if coming from Medellin, was born there, raised there, seeing Medellin in the 90s, then in the 2000s, then today, I think it's challenging, but we're better now than before. And if we are more intelligent in what type of programs we implement, I think we should get better at a faster pace. So I think there's reasons to be optimistic that this will work.
We hope you'll come back in 2 weeks for another uplifting exploration about the future of human flourishing. If you like the Stories of Impact podcast, please follow us. And if you have a minute, it would be awesome if you could give us a 5-star rating and a review. And we'd be thrilled to hear from you. You can find us at storiesofimpact.org. This has been the Stories of Impact podcast with interviews by Richard Sergey. Written and produced by Tavia Gilbert for Talkbox Productions. Senior producer Katie Flood. Assistant producer Oscar Falk. Production support by Mandy Moorish. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Executive producer Michelle Cobb. The Stories of Impact podcast is generously supported by Templeton World Charity Foundation.